Hey guys, tonight we're stepping straight into lace corsets, veiled glances, and a whole mountain of expectations. You're waking up in a narrow Victorian bed, sun just starting to pierce through the lace curtains. It's your wedding day, but not in the way you've been imagining since you were a little girl tracing hearts on frosted windows. Your fingers are shaking slightly, but not because of love. More like the kind of nerves you get when you're signing a loan document you didn't read. Because in many ways you are. Victorian marriages aren't born of passion. They're arranged with gloves on, literally. Courtship here is a strategic dance, a rehearsed performance under the watchful eyes of mothers, aunts, and family solicitors. You've had perhaps 3 moments truly alone with the man you're marrying today. None of them included a conversation longer than the weather or his favourite breed of hunting dog. He once complimented your embroidery. That's the emotional core you're about to legally entwine your future with. There's no turning back. The invitations have been engraved. Your father has negotiated the dowry, which included a mahogany cabinet, 3 mirror sets, and some bonds you've never seen. And your mother spent 3 weeks coaching you on how to appear both modest and attractive, while carefully reminding you not to look eager. Eagerness is unladylike. Now your maid is tightening the corset. She pulls and you exhale, but it's never enough. You'll need to spend your wedding day smiling in something that feels like a ribcage made of steel. Then it's into the dress. Cream satin, hand-stitched, with a modest neckline. White, of course, though until recently brides wore anything festive. Queen Victoria changed that, showing up in ivory lace for her own wedding in 1840, and now every social climber copies her. As you're finally ready, your mother hands you a blue ribbon for your garter, something borrowed, something blue, something old, something new, and whispers a sentence so sharp it slices the air. Remember, darling, you're not just marrying a man, you're marrying into a future. Outside, a carriage waits. Inside, a minister recites the vows, to love, honour and obey. That last word sticks in your throat like a dry biscuit. Obey isn't a symbolic flourish, it's the law. You're entering what legal scholars called coverture. From this moment on, your legal identity vanishes into your husband's. You can't sign contracts, you can't own property. You are, in legal terms, femme covert, a covered woman. Not covered like cherished, covered like erased. After the ceremony there's cake and dancing and whispers of your good match. He kisses your cheek. You smell gin. He gives a toast about domestic bliss and duty. You stare at your champagne and wonder if duty will always taste like dryness in your mouth. Later, when the guests leave and the carriage pulls away, you're finally alone with your husband. In theory, this is when the marriage becomes real. There's an awkward moment when neither of you know whether to talk about furniture or kiss. In some cases, the groom might be drunk. In others, terrified. And then there are the ones who are simply impatient. No one prepared you for this. Victorian etiquette books often described a woman's wifely duty as silent, enduring and sacred. They never described what to expect, just what to accept. You lie in bed that night staring at the ceiling, your corset finally off but the pressure somehow worse. The vows have been said, the paperwork filed, you're now someone's wife, and no one asked you whether you wanted to be. The room is dim and still, save for the crackle of coal in the fireplace and the distant sound of carriage wheels fading into the London fog. Your new husband is already asleep, or at least pretending to be. You lie on your back, tracing invisible patterns on the canopy above with your eyes. Your body aches in unfamiliar ways, some from the day's exertion, some from things you don't have the language to name yet. You think about the guests, the well-wishers, the smirking cousins who whispered about the wedding night as though it were a sporting event. One had even winked at you, and all the women who squeezed your hands just a little too tightly, as if passing you a secret message between the congratulations. In Victorian society, what happened behind the bedroom door was everyone's business, but never to be spoken of. Your body, once your own, is now shared property. Not metaphorically, legally. The famous jurist William Blackstone once wrote that by marriage, the husband and wife become one person in the law, and that person is the husband. In practice, that means if your husband wanted to take your money, your jewellery, even your letters. He could. If he hit you, well, that was a domestic matter, not for courtrooms. Unless, of course, you bled publicly. You think of your sister, married off the year before. She laughs less now, writes letters about tea and weather and troubles with the staff, but never about the way she looks thinner every time you visit. You remember when she confided, only once, that her husband thought her too emotional and had suggested she be examined by a physician. A week later she was prescribed bead rest and a mercury tonic. The fire dims, the room darkens. You pull the sheets tighter, unsure whether it's from cold or dread. Your husband stirs, mumbles something about the solicitor. He turns away from you in bed. And so begins the quiet, aching strangeness of Victorian marriage. Two people bound together by law, economy and reputation, sometimes love, but often not, sharing a life yet separated by oceans of expectation. For you, this isn't the beginning of romance, it's the beginning of performance. A lifelong play in which your lines have already been written for you. You remember hearing about a bride who fainted on her wedding night. Not from passion, but because no one had explained what would happen. Not her mother, not her governess, not her pastor. The morning after, she asked her maid if she was still pure. The maid simply nodded and said, "You're a wife now." You stare out the window. Somewhere beyond the gaslight haze and rooftop silhouettes, you imagine other women in other beds having the same thoughts, wondering the same things, praying for kindness, or at the very least for time to pass. Later that night you dream of walking through a garden in a dress made of paper. Every step tears a little more. You try to hold the pieces together, but the wind keeps rising. When you wake, it's still dark. But a new day is coming, the first full day of your marriage. You sit up slowly, feeling older than you were yesterday. Your maid will knock soon. Your husband will go to his office. And you'll learn what it means to be a Victorian wife, one silent breakfast at a time. The breakfast room smells of boiled eggs and burnt toast, and the butter is slightly too warm, sliding off the silver tray like it's trying to escape. You sit at one end of the long mahogany table, your husband at the other, as if intimacy were measured in feet. He clears his throat between mouthfuls, flips through the newspaper, and mutters something about the state of the colonies. You nod politely. He doesn't look up. This is your first full day as a married woman, and you're already being trained in the subtle art of silence. There's a new ring on your finger and a new title before your name, Mrs. You try it on in your mind like a costume. It doesn't quite fit yet. Your husband rises before you've finished your tea. "Letters to dictate," he says, not unkindly, and disappears into the study. The door clicks shut, and with it the illusion of companionship. You're left alone with the clink of china, the ticking clock, and the maid who hovers just close enough to refill your cup but never your thoughts. You'd hoped, perhaps foolishly, that today would bring conversation. A plan for the house, a shared walk, a moment that felt like something. But instead you're discovering that Victorian marriage isn't built on togetherness. It's built on distance, on roles, on ritual. You've inherited not just a husband, but an entire household. A small army of servants, most of whom have been here longer than you, and none of whom look pleased about the new mistress. There's the housekeeper, whose eyebrow lifts each time you make a request. The cook, who's already decided you eat like a sparrow. And the scullery maid, who stares at your dresses with a hunger that has nothing to do with food. But worst of all is your new mother-in-law. She does not live here permanently, but she might as well. Her hat sits in the front hall like a warning sign. She arrives unannounced, glides in without knocking, and examines the silverware as if looking for evidence of your unworthiness. "Oh, I always thought that wallpaper was too cheerful for a proper dining room," she says casually one afternoon, before launching into a story about how her wedding breakfast had included devilled kidneys and fresh marmalade. "But times do change," she adds, glancing at your plate. "Some girls prefer simpler things now." You smile, of course, because you must. Marriage in Victorian society isn't about you and your husband. It's about the entire social ecosystem you're now a part of. You've married into a name, a reputation, a network of expectations. And with that comes scrutiny from every angle. Family, servants, neighbours, acquaintances you haven't even met yet. Dowries are discussed in hushed tones, but everyone knows their value. Yours was decent. Not grand, not scandalous. Just enough to get you into this house, at the cost of becoming part of the furniture. You are, in essence, an asset, acquired through a legal, financial and social exchange. Your father provided the goods, your mother ensured they were well packaged, and your husband, for all his politeness, has entered into a business arrangement. The contract is signed. The goods are delivered. Now it's time to manage the estate. Later, when you retreat to your private sitting room, you find a note waiting on your writing desk. It's from your husband, short, punctuated. Dinner with the Pharaohs tonight. Black dress preferred. You run your finger across the words and feel something cold settle in your stomach. You were hoping for, looking forward to seeing you, or even just yours. But no, this isn't romance. This is scheduling. You glance at the black dress hanging in your wardrobe, then at your reflection, and you begin to understand what it means to become a Victorian wife, visible in society, invisible in the home. That evening you wear the black dress. It fits perfectly, too perfectly, as if it were stitched not for comfort but for containment. The neckline is modest, the sleeves tight. A string of pearls rests at your throat like a leash made elegant. You descend the stairs with the grace you've been taught, conscious of every step, every angle, every expression. Your husband waits at the bottom. He nods his approval. That's the most affection you'll receive all night. The Pharaoh's drawing room is a box of chattering porcelain figures, ladies with stiff curls and sharper smiles, men with sideburns and brandy glasses, all trading stories about politics, property, and the folly of continental manners. You sit beside your husband as if placed there by a chess master. Occasionally he gestures in your direction. My wife enjoyed the performance, didn't you, dear? And you smile on cue. Your job is not to participate, it's to reflect well. You learn quickly. In this world, women are ornamental. To be admired, yes, but not heard, especially not on matters of consequence. You attempt once to offer an opinion on the reform bill, having read about it in last week's Times, and the conversation stalls as if you've dropped a teacup. The hostess recovers gracefully by asking about your embroidery. Back home, you unpin your hair with slow fingers, your scalp aching from the weight of perfection. You wonder how many nights like this there will be, how many times you'll be wheeled out like the good set of china, only to be polished, displayed, and quietly returned to the cabinet. In quieter moments, you think about the value you were assigned. Not metaphorically, literally. During marriage negotiations, your dowry would have been itemized like an inventory sheet. $200 in cash, 2 acres of leased land, 6 silver candelabra, and possibly a piano. Your husband brought to the union a title, a townhouse, and family connections. In some cases, the man's wealth outweighed the woman's. In others, the opposite was true, and those women quickly found themselves controlled in proportion to their contribution. Dowries weren't just about money. They were a form of insurance. If you died childless, your dowry often returned to your family. If you bore a son, it remained with your husband. If your husband died early and kindly included you in his will, you might keep some of it, but mostly it vanished into his estate. You could sign the cheque, but never keep the pen. And for the daughters of less wealthy families, sometimes the dowry was so modest that it was supplemented with other assets, like beauty, or breeding, or a pliant nature. You've heard rumours of fathers who offered rare books, prized dogs, or even the promise of future business favours to sweeten the deal. One woman's uncle reportedly negotiated her marriage using 3 crates of brandy and a signed cricket bat. These transactions happen behind the scenes, of course, but you feel them in every interaction, at every dinner, in every glance that lingers a little too long on your necklace instead of your face. You're beginning to understand that Victorian marriage isn't just a union, it's a ledger, a calculated merging of 2 financial lives, wrapped in lace and sealed with public performance. The next morning, when your husband hands you a note about the week's social visits, you nod and thank him. But inside, you're already practicing your own arithmetic, how much of yourself you've spent, and how much you can afford to keep. The next Sunday arrives with church bells and cold air. You dress in dark wool, lace gloves buttoned at the wrist, and a hat wide enough to cast polite shadows over your expressions. Today is about respectability, posture, the appearance of unity. You and your husband walk side by side, but not arm in arm. That kind of closeness would be improper before God, or at least before the neighbours. Inside the chapel, the preacher's voice echoes off stone, rising toward the rafters like smoke. He reads aloud from the Book of Common Prayer the same words you mouthed during your wedding. Only now, sitting on a hard wooden pew beside a man who hasn't asked you a personal question in 4 days, the words sound different. To have and to hold. To love, honour and obey. There it is again. Obey. You glance sideways. Your husband's expression is neutral. Perhaps it always is. You try to recall if you've ever seen him surprised, or afraid, or silly. But no. Victorian men are trained to manage expressions the way they manage ledgers, strictly, without overexposure. After service, you linger in the vestibule as polite conversation buzzes around you. Mrs. Wickham comments on the frost. Reverend Ellis asks after your health. Another lady touches your elbow and says, "Isn't marriage the most rewarding form of discipline?" You nod, but you're not sure which word is more chilling, rewarding or discipline. You've begun to notice something. No one talks about love. Not really. Not outside of novels. Instead, they talk about duty, fidelity, social standing, an advantageous match. If affection comes up, it's framed as luck. They've grown fond of each other, someone whispers about the Miltons, as if fondness were a rash they caught after the ceremony. You once overheard a woman at a dinner party say, "Romance ends where the veil begins." She said it with a laugh, but you remember the way her eyes didn't follow. The truth is, Victorian vows are more contract than covenant. In the eyes of the law, marriage grants the man full control over his wife's body and property. But for women, there is no escape clause. No grounds for divorce unless adultery is paired with additional cruelty. He must not only betray you, but humiliate or harm you as well. Even then, divorce requires a public trial. And public trials mean scandal, and scandal means ruin. That's why most women endure. Silently. With grace, if they can muster it. You've read somewhere that even Queen Victoria herself described women as weak and helpless in relation to men, that the domestic sphere is their proper place. And when the Queen thinks that way, well, what hope do you have? But inside your own mind you begin to ask questions. Not aloud, of course, not yet. But they start to flicker at the edges of your thoughts like candle flames. What would happen if I didn't obey? What would happen if I wrote my own vows? One day, in the quiet of your dressing room, you begin a small rebellion. A notebook, hidden behind your sewing basket. On the first page you write, to question, to remember, and to survive. No one sees it. No one knows. But for the first time since your wedding day, the ink feels like it belongs to you. The notebook becomes your secret cathedral. You fill its pages slowly, in the space between obligations, between embroidery lessons and supper plans, and the daily charade of smiling when your husband recounts the parliamentary debates over port. You don't write poetry or confessions, you write observations, fragments, a quiet rebellion in cursive. Today he asked whether I needed a new bonnet. He has never asked what I think about the way he talks to the maid. Mrs. Penfield's husband keeps her on a schedule like a train line. He times her walks. She smiles like the clock is always ticking. You never intended to become a recorder of marital anthropology, but here you are, documenting a world of well-mannered prisons. The more you notice, the more you understand. Marriage isn't just about the man and the woman. It's about the performance, the image, the myth of harmonious domesticity. In town, people whisper admiringly about the Rutherford marriage. They say your husband is dependable, respectable, that you're lucky. You nod and thank them. They don't see the way he closes the study door behind him every night, or how he compliments your dress the same way he praises the roast beef, pleasant, sufficient, but with no curiosity about the recipe. You wonder what would happen if you stopped pretending. If one morning you looked across the breakfast table and said, "I'm not happy," the idea alone feels scandalous. Victorian culture doesn't allow space for marital dissatisfaction, at least not from women. Unhappiness is seen as ingratitude. Your husband provides, doesn't he? The bills are paid. The staff is managed. What else could you possibly want? But you know better now. You've seen the quiet faces of other wives at society luncheons, the flicker of something behind their eyes when their husbands talk over them. You've noticed the way some women ask about books or music in the vaguest terms, as if testing whether such interests are allowed. You've also heard of wives who turn to the bottle, or to laudanum, or to compulsive sewing that bordered on madness. Anything to fill the silence. And then there's the legal trap. If you were to leave him, really leave, what happens? You have no rights to your own money. You cannot claim the house. If children come, they will belong to him, not you. Until 1839, a father could take children from their mother after separation without explanation. Even after the Custody of Infants Act, the courts favoured men. Always men. Some women, desperate beyond desperation, staged affairs, not for pleasure, but for evidence. Because under Victorian law, adultery was the only real ticket to legal separation. But even then, the woman would bear the disgrace, a stained reputation, whispers, no second chances. One case you've read about haunts you. A woman named Caroline Norton. She was clever, well-connected, a writer. When she separated from her abusive husband, he took her children and barred her from earning money through her own writing. She had no legal recourse because married women had no legal identity. Caroline spent years fighting for reform, not just for herself, but for the women she knew were suffering in silence, and she almost succeeded. Almost. You think of her often when you write in your notebook. One evening your husband walks into the drawing room while you're scribbling. You close the notebook too quickly. He raises an eyebrow. Still keeping that diary? You nod, your throat dry. Good. Helps the nerves, I suppose. He walks away without asking what's inside, and in that moment you feel something strange. Relief. Yes, but also a growing certainty. He will never ask, and that gives you freedom in a way. The freedom of being underestimated. Later that night you return to the page. He thinks I am content. That may be my greatest disguise. Your world is not just your husband. It's the house. And not just the rooms you inhabit, but the people who drift through them like minor characters in a play, where you're the lead, but never the director. From the outside, your new home looks refined. Red brick, ivy creeping up the side like lacework, a brass knocker polished to perfection. Inside, it is crowded. You were told marriage would be a partnership. You weren't told it came with an audience. Your husband's mother visits frequently, as you already know. But then there's his cousin, who is between places, and his childhood friend who dines with you 4 nights a week. And let's not forget the household staff. 2 maids, a cook, a footman, and a housekeeper who seems to be running a quiet coup. Even the dog seems to have a schedule more respected than yours. You're never quite alone. The drawing room is no longer yours to rearrange. The parlour's decor was chosen long before your arrival. Your husband prefers the old furniture, the heavy curtains, the portraits of grim ancestors who seem to judge you from the walls. You once moved a vase to a brighter corner and found it quietly replaced the next morning. It turns out the Victorian household is a machine, and you, despite your legal role as mistress of the house, are merely one of its polished gears. The real operations happen beneath your feet, in the kitchen, in the scullery, in whispered conversations among the staff about how her ladyship's too quiet, or never touches the bacon. You feel them watching you, judging you, the way the cook watches the roasting goose. You try to assert authority. You suggest a change in the breakfast hour. Your husband prefers 9, but you think 8 is more efficient. The butler coughs. The maid drops her spoon, and by next morning breakfast is served at 9. You realise that despite being nominally in charge, your authority is entirely performative. The real hierarchy is more complicated. The housekeeper answers to your husband. The cook answers to the housekeeper. And you? You answer to tradition. One day, you enter the sitting room and overhear the staff gossiping downstairs. They don't notice you at first. "She don't eat," says one. "Looks like she'd faint if the wind blew," says another. A third voice chimes in, older and lower. "She's like them dollies you see in shop windows. Pretty, but not for using." You step back before they see you. You tell yourself you're not crying, just tired. But deep down, you know, you've become something decorative, functional, yes, expected to host, to smile, to maintain appearances, but not really known. Not even by the people who set your fire and bring your tea. Later, during a dull evening of card games with your husband's cousin, you wonder whether your mother-in-law went through this too. Whether the women you see walking Regent Street in quiet resignation feel the same suffocating sense of being watched, but never seen. At night, you lie in bed beside your husband and think, I live with him, but not truly with him. We inhabit the same space. We breathe the same air. But we're strangers. Cordial, well-behaved strangers in a house that echoes too loudly, and yet no one would ever guess. The carpets are thick, the silver shines, the servants bow. From the outside, it's the picture of Victorian perfection. But inside, you're an exhibit in a carefully curated museum, just another piece in his collection. Your days begin to feel like scripted routines. Rise, dress, smile, supervise, sit, nod, sleep. Even your footsteps on the wooden floors seem rehearsed, paced to match the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway. You're not unhappy in a dramatic sense. No slammed doors or shouted accusations, but in a way that seeps in slowly, like damp behind wallpaper. It doesn't ruin everything all at once, just softens the foundation until one day the whole structure feels like it might crumble with a sigh. Your husband remains distant but consistent. Every morning he departs in the same grey overcoat, briefcase in hand, and every evening he returns with the same routine. Dinner, brandy, newspaper, silence. Occasionally he shares bits of news. Parliament, the stock market, a friend's hunting trip, but never asks you about your day. He assumes there is nothing to ask, and perhaps that's the most crushing part. He doesn't need to hurt you to diminish you. He simply needs to forget you're more than furniture. But not everyone is so forgetful. There's the maid, Elsie, barely 16, who watches you with wide, dark eyes and a cautious reverence. She curtsies low, speaks little, and never meets your gaze unless prompted. One day, when you drop a handkerchief and she rushes to retrieve it, you thank her softly, and something flickers in her face. Surprise? Relief? As if she hadn't expected acknowledgement from a woman in your position. Later that evening, you overhear her in the hallway, whispering to the kitchen boy. "She said thank you," she says, "like I mattered." You sit with that longer than you expect. There's also the cook, Mrs. Bramble, who one afternoon brings you a scone from the batch that turned out particularly good. You compliment the taste. She nods, then lingers. "Hard, isn't it?" she says, not looking at you. Being the new lady, the house never quite listens to you at first. You blink. It's the first thing anyone said that sounds like truth. You nod, and she nods back. That's it. No further talk. But the next day, the tea is warmer, and the scones arrive without asking. And then there's your husband's cousin, Edward. He's often at dinner, always quick with a joke, his eyes brighter than the rest. You first assumed he came for your husband. But lately you notice he listens when you speak. He remembers when you mention books, asks questions about the music you're practicing, even laughs at your dry little comments that usually fall into silence. One evening you find yourselves alone in the conservatory, surrounded by shadowy palms and the scent of damp earth. "You look tired," he says, not unkindly. You hesitate, then smile. "I suppose I am." He leans in just a little. Well, for what it's worth, you carry it with great dignity. It's a small thing, a compliment tossed like a pebble into a still pool, but the ripples it leaves surprise you. After he leaves, you return to your writing desk. The notebook waits. Dignity, you write, may be the prettiest cage of all. Your handwriting is a little shakier than usual, but your pulse is not. There are rules you were taught growing up, what to say, how to curtsy, when to lower your eyes. But there were other rules too, the ones whispered behind fans or slipped between the lines of etiquette books, the rules of what a wife must never speak of, never question, never want. Desire in the Victorian home is like mildew, real, pervasive, and best ignored. You learn this quickly. In the first months of your marriage, the bedroom is a place of confusion more than comfort, not just because the act itself is clumsy or silent or unromantic, but because no one told you how to make sense of your own feelings, or your lack of them, or the way they shift depending on the hour, the look in his eyes, the sound of the door closing behind him. You begin to understand why so many Victorian women were labelled hysterical. Your friend Charlotte, married just a year longer than you, confided over tea that her physician recommended cold baths and spiritual reflection to cure her unseemly sensitivity. Her offence, weeping after being summoned to her husband's bed at midnight. "I should be grateful," she said, eyes dull. "He says I'm still young enough to bear him another." You nodded at the time, but later, in your room, you wrote, "Gratitude and fear wear the same dress in the dark." Some nights your husband reaches for you, wordless, and you yield because it's expected. Other nights, he doesn't touch you at all, and somehow that feels worse. You start to wonder which is more unbearable, being used or being unnoticed. And yet, you cannot talk about this. Not with your mother, who warned you before the wedding, "Don't make a fuss about such things, dear. A woman's discomfort is the price of stability." Not with the maid, who blushes when you mention needing more linens. Not even with your doctor, who assumes your questions about restlessness are female nerves and prescribes a syrup laced with opium. You're not ill. You're just curious, anxious, tired, alive. But the society around you insists that proper women are not supposed to crave, not touch, not question. Men have passions. Women have tendencies toward frailty. And so, the medical world invented diagnoses to suit the culture: hysteria, uterine congestion, wandering wombs. Yes, wandering wombs. You laugh when you read that one in a medical journal. The theory goes that if a woman is moody or disobedient, it's because her uterus has, quite literally, moved to the wrong part of her body. The suggested cures? Pelvic massage, electric stimulation, or in extreme cases, surgical removal. You stop laughing after a while. These aren't old ideas gathering dust in forgotten books. They're practiced, applied, carried out in clinics and drawing rooms by physicians with whiskers and university degrees. Sometimes, under the guise of treatment, women are violated, and no one calls it that. In the society section of the Morning Post, you read about Lady G. Recently, much improved after being sent to a sanitarium for female melancholia. Rumour says her only crime was insisting on a separate bedroom. Her husband, a baron, was congratulated for managing the affair with discretion. You close the paper with shaking fingers. That night when your husband climbs into bed beside you, you hold your breath and pretend to be asleep. Not out of defiance, just fatigue. He doesn't insist. But the silence between you now has shape, has teeth. And in the dark you begin to wonder, what does it mean to be a wife whose body belongs to another, but whose thoughts no longer do? It starts with dreams. Some nights, you dream of walking alone down a beach that doesn't exist. Barefoot, hair unpinned, sea wind slicing through your skirts. In the dream, no one is watching you. No one is expecting you. You don't belong to anyone. You wake up with your heart racing and the sheets tangled around your legs, feeling oddly ashamed. Other nights, you don't dream at all. Just drift in that strange blankness that comes after too much swallowing down what you want to say. And somewhere in the middle, a different kind of question begins to take root. Not, what's wrong with me, but what if nothing is? One afternoon you stumble upon a book hidden behind a row of Dickens novels in the library. A medical text, of all things, written not for women but about them. You flip through diagrams and rigid moralistic pronouncements about sexual excess and wifely moderation. And then you reach a footnote that startles you. A small but growing number of physicians now suggest that women too may experience physical pleasure, and its denial may be the cause of certain neuroses. The book was published anonymously. You snap it shut, blood pounding in your ears. The very idea that a woman's body is not just a vessel, not just a duty, but a source of something. Sovereign. It hits like thunder, but you say nothing, not yet. Instead, you begin to notice things. The way the other wives glance at each other in drawing rooms when their husbands brag about virility. The way some women linger just a moment too long when helping another adjust a corset. You recall one of your aunt's friends, Lady Thistlewood, who never married and lived with her companion for 30 years. You'd thought nothing of it as a child. Now you wonder. And then, one rainy afternoon, you run into Beatrice, your old schoolmate, at a bookshop. She's wearing a coat far too modern for this side of town and eyes that carry secrets. Over tea, she leans in and says, "You look like you need someone to talk to." You hesitate, then she says, "I know what it's like to be married and invisible. It takes everything not to cry." She speaks in careful phrases, coded but clear, about loneliness, about hunger of all kinds, about the spaces women make when the world gives them none. "You're not alone," she says finally. "There are others." She doesn't explain what that means, but she gives you a name, a meeting place, and a quiet, knowing smile. That night, back home, you find yourself staring in the mirror longer than usual. You touch your collarbone, your wrist, the hollow just above your hip. Not with shame, but curiosity. For once, not thinking about how someone else might look at you, but how you feel inside your own skin. You realize it isn't passion you fear. It's permission. In your notebook, you write, "They trained me to be afraid of myself, but I am still here." You don't know what comes next. But for the first time in months, you feel something crack open. Not rebellion exactly, not yet. Just a quiet returning. And the knowledge that no one, not your husband, not society, not even the law, can govern the secret country blooming behind your ribs. It begins, as many Victorian problems do, with a cough. Just a small one, barely noticeable at first. But your husband insists. "Best to have it looked at," he says, setting down his spoon with the authority of someone who's never been ill a day in his life. You nod, not because you agree, but because you know better than to disagree. It's one of those little gestures wives learn to perform without resistance, like wearing mourning colours for someone you never liked, or laughing at a joke told 3 dozen times before. So you summon the physician, a man with silver-rimmed spectacles and too much cologne. He arrives late with damp boots and a leather bag that creaks like an old door. He asks you 3 questions. How long have you had the cough? Any trouble breathing? Are you sleeping well? You answer, a few days, not really, and yes, though none of those answers are particularly true. He peers at your tongue, presses fingers along your throat and declares, likely a touch of nervous exhaustion. Women in your position often suffer from it. You're not built for too much strain. You're not sure whether to laugh or scream. Instead, you offer him tea. As he stirs in 2 lumps of sugar, he launches into a well-practiced lecture about the peculiar fragility of the female nervous system. He mentions hysteria, of course, and something about the womb interfering with the lungs, though the logic escapes you. He advises fresh air, limited reading, and a temporary reduction in social calls. He does not ask if you are lonely. He does not ask if you feel safe. He does not ask anything that might make you a person instead of a case. Then he opens his bag and removes a small bottle. Green glass, handwritten label. Laudanum. You've heard of it, of course. Every woman has. opium dissolved in alcohol, prescribed for coughs, headaches, nerves, melancholy, menstrual discomfort, unwomanly agitation. In other words, anything that doesn't conform neatly to the role you've been given. You hold the bottle delicately, as if it might burn. It will help you rest, he says with a smile. He means it will help you stay quiet. After he leaves, your husband returns to his study. Do as he says, he calls behind him. No point making it worse. You sit with the bottle in your palm. The amber liquid inside catches the lamplight, shimmering like something alive. You don't drink it. Not yet. Instead, you write. They call it medicine. I call it silencing syrup, but I will not go quietly. That night, your dreams are feverish. You are walking through a field of mirrors, each one reflecting a different version of you, some smiling, some screaming, some silent. You wake with a start, pulse racing, and the cough rattling in your chest like a small rebellion. The next day, you pour the laudanum into a flower vase when no one is watching. The lilies wilt. You do not. You avoid calling the doctor back. Instead, you take longer walks. Not for your lungs, though that's the excuse you give, but for your mind, for the brief freedom of stepping beyond the walls of your home, beyond the carefully managed spaces where everything has a label and a use. Outside, even the fog feels like rebellion, unshaped, unclaimed. On one such walk you pass by a bookseller's window and pause. Nestled between volumes of poetry and moral instruction is a title you've never seen before. The Female Body and the Mind, New Theories in Gentle Medicine. The cover is unremarkable, but something about it feels subversive, as if the author slipped it onto the shelf when no one was looking. You step inside and buy it without asking questions. Back home, you read it in secret, behind drawn curtains. The author, a woman, though she signs with only her initials, dares to suggest that female suffering is not a symptom but a message. That women aren't naturally weaker, merely overruled. That hysteria is not a condition of the womb, but of the world that traps it. One passage catches in your throat. A society that refuses to listen to a woman's voice must always diagnose her as ill when she raises it. You copy the sentence into your notebook in careful ink. Later that evening, during a dull supper of boiled mutton and lukewarm potatoes, your husband remarks that you seem brighter. Must be the fresh air, he says, chewing absently. Or the tonic. You did take the tonic, didn't you? You smile. Every drop. It's not quite a lie. The flowers drank it, after all. You think about the women who did take the laudanum, some to sleep, some to cope, some to slip away entirely. The statistics are quietly horrifying. By the 1870s, it's estimated that as many as 1 in 4 middle-class women used laudanum regularly. Doctors prescribed it like peppermint, for every ailment, for every silence they didn't want to fill. But laudanum didn't just dull pain, it dulled rage, confusion, curiosity. That's why you said no. Not because you're brave, but because you're beginning to realize that numbness is more dangerous than discomfort, that the world wants wives to drift through their days like lace curtains, soft, translucent, easily pushed aside. You are done drifting. A week later, you visit Beatrice again. She introduces you to a small circle of women who gather every fortnight under the pretense of botanical study. There are no husbands, no maids, no doctors, just women with sharp minds and careful words, sharing essays and experiences and sometimes just long, aching silences. One of them, a widow in her 40s, brings her own notebook, filled with poems she's never published. Another reads aloud a letter she once wrote to her younger self. It ends with, "Don't wait to feel real. You don't share anything that night, but you stay long after the tea goes cold. When you return home, your husband is already asleep. The house is silent. You pass the cabinet where the laudanum once sat and feel, not fear, but defiance. Your body still aches. The cough hasn't entirely gone, but you feel awake in a way that startles you. You whisper, just once, into the dark, 'I am not a diagnosis.'" and the dark, for the first time in weeks, seems to listen. There's a strange kind of loneliness that settles over a house like yours. Not loud, not theatrical, just a dull, humming presence, like the sound of a clock that ticks a little too loudly when no one's speaking. You become intimately familiar with it. It follows you from room to room, from breakfast trays to drawing room firesides, curling under the rugs and behind the wallpaper. It waits at the edge of every carefully planned social engagement, every stiff dinner party, every day you spend alone while your husband attends to business. But it's not just about being physically alone, it's about being absent in someone else's presence. Your husband does not mistreat you. He greets you each morning, nods at you across the dinner table, hands you letters from the post with a polite, "This came for you." He doesn't shout, he doesn't strike. In fact, he rarely raises his voice above the level of quiet commentary on the weather. And yet, there are days he forgets what colour your eyes are, days he refers to you in the third person when guests arrive. The wife will show you the garden. She's quite good at watercolours, not as a person, as a feature of the home. Once you stood beside him at a party while he spoke for 5 minutes about a holiday you both took to Bath. Only you hadn't gone. It was his sister. You opened your mouth to correct him, then saw his glassy smile, the way the guests nodded along and said nothing. And perhaps that's the sharpest blade of all. The indifference. Because how do you grieve a thing that was never offered? How do you repair a relationship built entirely on protocol and polite absence? You spend your days among polished surfaces and rooms that echo. You visit the market, the dressmaker, the florist. You have conversations about ribbons and recipes and the Queen's latest garden fete. But you feel as though you are living in the margins of a life. Someone else's margins. Sometimes, when you pass the mirror in the hallway, you catch a glimpse of yourself and barely recognise the expression on your face. It's not sadness exactly, it's invisibility. A gentle erosion of self. You start watching other couples, at church, in the park, at dinners. Most are like you, cordial, distant, civilised to the point of numbness. A few are openly cold, and occasionally, just occasionally, you see something else. A glance held too long, fingers brushing under the table, real warmth. You don't envy them, you ache at them, and that ache grows. It grows when you sit across from your husband and he doesn't notice the ring you stopped wearing, when he doesn't ask what you're writing, when he speaks at you, not with you. And worst of all, it grows when you start to prefer it this way, when the silence feels safer than the effort of trying to connect. You write in your notebook, "We live in the same house, but in separate seasons." That's what Victorian marriage can become, a shared address with no shared interior. Two people bound by law, custom and ceremony, each quietly drifting towards separate shores. Some days you forget to speak at all until mid-afternoon. It's not intentional. It's just that no one requires your voice. The staff know their roles, your husband, his routines. Even the dog, an aging spaniel with more interest in napping than companionship, seems content to ignore you unless bacon is involved. The world continues spinning whether you say a word or not. And then one day, you receive a letter. Not a social invitation, not a cousin's birth announcement. A real letter. From your sister, now living in the north, far from the velvet curtains and silver teaspoons of your life. She writes, "You never write about how you are, only what you do. Are you well, truly? I sometimes wonder if we've both disappeared into marriages that have no mirrors. You read it 3 times. Then you fold it gently and hide it inside your notebook, between 2 blank pages that suddenly feel heavy with possibility. That evening, you attempt to talk to your husband, not about dinner or guests or the carriage needing oil, about you. You sit across from him in the drawing room, your tea cooling in your hand. You say, 'I feel,' and then hesitate. You've never practiced this sentence. You're not even sure what comes after. He looks up, startled. 'You feel ill?' he asks, already halfway toward the bell pull. You shake your head. 'No, I feel lonely.' He pauses, blinks, then sets his paper aside neatly. You have the staff. You go out often. You see your friends. I've ensured you have everything you need. The sentence hangs in the air like thick drapery. Everything you need, not everything you want, not everything you are. You try again. I mean, I miss being known. A beat. Then he chuckles awkwardly. You're overthinking again. Maybe cut back on the novels. And just like that, the door shuts again. Not loudly, but finally. You don't try a third time. Later, you sit at your writing desk. The pen feels heavier than usual. You write. If a tree falls in a forest and no one hears it, does it make a sound? If a wife disappears within a marriage and no one notices, was she ever there to begin with? And yet, there's a curious comfort in having put the words somewhere, in knowing that the page sees you, even if he does not. You think of the women you've met in Beatrice's circle, the quiet defiance of their existence, the way they carve out small spaces of reality between expectations. One makes music in secret, another writes letters to herself, addressed from different names. One knits, and every stitch she drops on purpose feels like a protest. These women aren't rebels, they are rememberers, and so you begin to remember yourself. You start playing the pianoforte again, not at social events but alone. You select books your husband would call improper and read them in full sunlight. You take walks without a companion, you answer fewer letters. You stay silent longer when people say, "You're so lucky." And sometimes, just sometimes, you catch your own reflection and smile, not because you're happy, but because you're still here, not vanished, not erased, not quite, just waiting. It's the faintest trace at first, just a scent. Orange blossom and musk drifting from the collar of his overcoat as he hangs it by the door. It isn't yours. You don't wear perfume that heavy. It lingers in the hallway, then in your mind, then in your memory, calling back all the subtle things you'd trained yourself not to see. The quiet humming from the study when he thinks he's alone, the locked drawer in his writing desk, the sudden urge to travel to Bath for a business retreat with no paperwork in sight, and now, the scent. You don't ask immediately, not because you're timid, but because you already know the answer. What you want now is something else entirely, not confrontation, not even confession. Just truth, stripped of performance. The next evening he returns late. No apology. He removes his gloves slowly without looking at you. His waistcoat smells faintly floral again, so you ask simply, "Who is she?" He blinks, freezes, then offers the kind of silence that confirms everything. You wait. Still no answer. He walks past you into the sitting room. I don't know what you mean, but he does know. You both do. Victorian society is full of unwritten rules, but few are as well known as this one. Men are permitted indiscretions, so long as they are discreet. Mistresses are not just tolerated, they are expected in certain circles, hidden in apartments, in opera boxes, in corners of gentlemen's clubs with no windows and too much brandy. There's even a name for them. Demi-mondaines. Women who occupy a half-world of wealth and scandal. Too glamorous to be dismissed, too improper to be embraced. They wear silks you can't afford and speak with the confidence of women who've been chosen after the wedding vows. You've seen them before, at balls, at theatres. One even smirked at you once while adjusting her gloves. You remember reading about a particular case in the papers, Lord B.M.L. and his affair with a French courtesan. His wife, it was said, took to her nerves and retired to the countryside. Society praised her grace. His name was never tarnished. And now, here you are. You sit down at your writing desk, not to cry, not to scream, but to write. He has another. I have myself. And today, that feels almost enough. Later, you open his desk drawer. Inside are letters, dozens of them, carefully folded. The handwriting is precise, slanted, and unmistakably not yours. You read only one. It is flowery and cruel in its confidence. It speaks of your husband's lonely evenings, and how no wife could possibly understand a man like him. You refold the letter and place it back exactly as you found it. No scenes, no scandals, but something inside you crystallizes. This isn't just betrayal, it's permission. The unspoken understanding that his needs justify secrets, while yours are barely permitted thoughts. You walk to the mirror and look at yourself. The same face, the same dress. But something has changed. Not broken, hardened. In the candlelight you whisper, "If he can have a double life, so can I." You don't confront him again. You don't need to. The house becomes a theatre of unspoken truths. You move through the days with practiced grace, pouring tea, attending social functions, managing the household accounts, all while knowing, down to the smallest movement, that you're no longer playing the role he wrote for you. You've become your own understudy, slipping behind the curtain the moment his back is turned. And behind that curtain, you begin to live. It starts subtly. You take longer walks, but now with purpose. You pass by certain cafes not because you like the tea, but because you know who frequents them. You attend book readings. You nod at familiar faces. And once, just once, you let your gloved hand brush the fingers of someone else's beneath a table. You're not having an affair. Not yet. But you are entertaining the possibility of possibility, something Victorian wives were never supposed to do. At the next gathering of Beatrice's circle, the conversation shifts. A woman named Ada, soft-spoken and sharp-eyed, tells the story of her sister's annulment, a rare miracle granted only because the husband was found to be impotent. She says the word plainly, without shame, and the room doesn't flinch. You sit quietly until the tea cools, then ask, "Have any of you ever stepped outside the marriage?" The pause is brief. Then one woman says, "Yes." Another nods. A third simply smiles. Not scandalously, not recklessly, just honestly. They talk not of seduction, but of freedom. Moments of recognition. Laughter in a library. A touch on a gloved hand that made them feel more seen than a decade of marriage ever did. You don't tell them your husband is seeing someone else. You don't need to. They already know. And for the first time you realize you're not alone. Not in your loneliness, not in your awareness, and certainly not in your anger. Anger has a place here. Not the firebrand kind, but the slow-brewing, silk-gloved sort. The kind that makes women write anonymous pamphlets, pass banned novels between sleeves, and look at each other for a second too long in crowded rooms. You begin to flirt. Not outrageously, just enough to remember what it feels like to be interesting. To be asked a question for the sake of the answer. You laugh louder than usual one night at a dinner party, and catch your husband glancing at you with mild confusion, as if noticing you have a pulse for the first time in months. You don't explain yourself. He stops mentioning the business trips. You stop asking. The next time you pass by his study, the door is ajar. You see him writing, head bent, and for a moment you imagine telling him everything. The letters you've hidden, the meetings, the truth. But then you remember the scent of orange blossom, the drawer full of lies, the silence that followed your question, and so you simply keep walking. Later, in your notebook, you write, "He built a world where love is a privilege for men. I am building one where it is a right for me." You press the page flat. You light a candle. You pour yourself a glass of wine, not the watered-down port he prefers, but something bold and sweet and chosen by you. And for the first time in your marriage, you toast yourself. You begin to see the signs everywhere, if not in plain sight, then just behind it. A nod too knowing, a glance too brief, an address written a little too carefully in a ledger meant for grocery orders. London, it turns out, is full of shadows that move when no one's looking. And tucked inside those shadows is a marketplace of secrets. You stumble upon it by accident, or perhaps by quiet intention. You're accompanying Beatrice to an art supply shop near Piccadilly when she suggests a shortcut through a narrow alley. It's lined with innocuous signs, tailors, bookbinders, tobacconists. But behind the third window on the right, past the curtain of dusty lace, is a shop with no name at all. Inside you find corsets that aren't built for function, perfumes that are banned in polite society, and masks, not for parties, but for play. A man in a velvet coat greets Beatrice by name. "This," she says to you with the faintest smirk, "is where people come to remember what their bodies are for." You feel your face flush before you even fully understand what she means. It's not all scandal. It's something stranger, a kind of freedom wrapped in velvet and lit by gas lamps. The women here are not ashamed, nor are they kept. They are choosing. One of them, a woman named Lillian, invites you to a private gathering. "Nothing improper," she says with a wink, "just conversation and truth." You accept. The gathering is held in a small drawing room above a piano tuner's shop. The curtains are drawn, the lamps low. No one uses real names. There's no need. You're not here to impress. You're here to listen. The women speak openly, not of scandal, but of the absurdity of pretending that desire belongs only to men. Some are married, some are not. A few, like you, live double lives so skillfully that even they forget which one is the original. One woman reads aloud a letter she once received from a lover, a footman, decades younger than her, who kissed her once behind a greenhouse and made her feel 17 again. "He died of consumption 2 months later," she says, folding the letter with shaking hands. "But for one afternoon, I remembered I had skin." Another woman, a former governess turned poet, speaks about her visits to what she calls the love markets, private clubs, boudoir hidden behind apothecaries, rooms where married women are treated as beings, not ornaments. "We're not there for sin," she says. "We're there for recognition. And you don't speak at all. But you feel something shift, like the loosening of a stay beneath your dress. Not shame, not thrill, just relief. Relief that you are not mad, not broken, not alone." Victorian society would call these women ruined. But as you look around at their posture, their ease, their self, you realise how wrong that word is. Ruin implies collapse. These women are rebuilt. That night, as you leave, Lillian presses a card into your palm. A name, a location, no explanation. "If you ever need to remember what being wanted feels like," she says, "they'll know who sent you." You slip the card into your glove and walk into the London fog. And for the first time in a long while, the cold air on your skin feels like a kind of proof. You exist. Entirely. Back home, you enter your drawing room with the grace expected of a wife returning from errands. Your husband doesn't look up from his newspaper. He never asks where you go anymore. He assumes, as always, that propriety is a foregone conclusion. You sit, pour tea, fold your gloves, and in your pocket the card Lillian gave you presses against your thigh like a pulse. You don't go that night. Not the next, either. You're not rushing toward rebellion. You're unfolding. Slowly. Like a letter you've been afraid to open. But the invitation is there now, stitched into the fabric of your awareness, and something else is growing with it. A new kind of confidence. Not loud, not showy, but undeniable. You speak differently at dinners. You laugh at things you aren't meant to find amusing. You ask questions, real ones, of men who aren't used to being challenged. One gentleman nearly chokes on his soup when you suggest that perhaps not every woman was meant to stay in the nursery or the drawing room. You lock eyes with Beatrice across the table. She raises her glass in silent toast, and then, on an evening when the house feels particularly heavy with silence and civility, you do it. You dress plainly. No lace, no jewellery, just a dark cloak, gloves and boots made for walking. You take a carriage not to the theatre nor the florist, but to a part of town you've never seen this late. The gas lamps flicker. The fog curls along the cobblestones like smoke from a secret fire. You find the door, knock once, then twice. A woman opens it. Not young, not old. Beautiful in the way a statue is. Carved, deliberate, unblinking. "You're expected," she says. Inside it's quiet, warm, lit by a chandelier that looks like it fell out of a dream. There's music playing, soft minor chords on a piano somewhere in the next room. Women and men speak in low tones, glasses clink, laughter floats without echo. and everyone looks present. No masks, no posturing. A man approaches. He's not striking, not flamboyant, but he meets your gaze as if you are the only person in the room. "I've heard about you," he says. You lift an eyebrow. "From whom?" He smiles. "Someone who sees you." You don't ask what that means. You don't need to. You speak with him for an hour. Nothing happens that would scandalize the society column. But you leave feeling something you've not felt in years. Visible. Not as someone's wife. Not as the keeper of a household. Just you. When you return home, the drawing room is empty. The fire is out. Your husband is already asleep. You undress slowly. Fold your garments not like obligations, but like offerings to yourself. You light a single candle, sit at your desk, and open your notebook. Tonight, you don't write a line. You write a page. You describe the door, the chandelier, the voice that called you expected, the moment you laughed and didn't second-guess the sound. You close with this. In a city where so many women are bought, bartered, or ignored, there are still corners where we find each other, and in those corners we remember we are not his, we are not theirs, we are ours. You hear of her in whispers first, not a friend, not even an acquaintance, just a name passed between teacups at a garden party. Mrs. Eliza Fairfax, aged 29, formerly of Gloucester Square, the wife who left. It's said as a scandal, of course. One woman lowers her voice to say, "Ran off with a poet." Another rolls her eyes. She was always dramatic. A third murmurs, "She'll regret it." No one respects a woman who makes a scene, but not a single soul mentions why. And when they do, eventually you learn. Eliza had been married to a banker. Quiet, stern, never cruel, never kind. She had no children, no income of her own, and no permission to travel. She filed for annulment on grounds of neglect, and was laughed out of court. Judges said her husband provided her a home, food, and his presence when reasonably available. What more could she want? She fled anyway, took nothing, left her name behind like a corset unlaced. Now, depending on who you ask, she's living in France with a playwright, or in Kent with her brother, or in sin with no one at all. What matters is, she left, and society has branded her ungrateful. That word sticks with you. It always does. Because you're beginning to notice just how many women are punished not for breaking the rules, but for refusing to pretend the rules are kind. Annulments, separations, and divorce in your world aren't merely legal battles. They are public executions of reputation. For a man, infidelity is a flaw. For a woman, it's an identity. You've seen the notices in the Morning Chronicle. Wife of Captain Thorne. Separated due to improper conduct. No context, no appeal. Just exile in print. The Matrimonial Causes Act of 1857 was supposed to change everything. It allowed for civil divorce. It made the proceedings slightly more accessible to the upper middle classes. But the fine print made one thing clear. A man could divorce his wife for adultery alone. A woman had to prove adultery plus cruelty, desertion, or another high crime. So much for equality. You think of Caroline Norton again, the writer who fought for her own children, her own name and still lost. A woman who helped change the law, only to be personally destroyed by it. She never remarried. She once wrote, "An English wife is not only the property but the slave of her husband." You didn't understand what she meant when you first read that years ago. You do now. One morning, you see a letter addressed to your husband from a legal firm. You're not meant to see it. But it's open, sitting atop his desk, carelessly left in a moment of distraction. It's not about business. It's from a solicitor confirming a financial arrangement between your husband and a woman you suspect is her, the one with the orange blossom scent. The letter is brief, formal, and oddly cold. A paid silence. You stare at the page, not with fury, but with clarity. He would never risk scandal. He would rather buy peace than speak truth. And should you ever dare speak yours, the law would not be yours to lean on. Not yet. You sit in the study chair, his chair, and write just one sentence on a scrap of paper. If I leave, I will not ask your permission. You fold it, slide it under the leg of the chair. He'll never see it. That's not the point. It's for you. The idea of escape settles into your bones like a second skeleton. Quiet, solid, hidden beneath everything you wear and do. You begin to see your routines not as structure, but as camouflage. Every polite smile, every nod at the butcher, every curtsy at the church door. All of it buys you time. You're not planning an exit. Not exactly. You're preparing to be ready. You speak to a seamstress you trust. Ask about taking in a few old dresses, a little tighter at the waist. Not because you need them fitted, but because it's a reason to meet. She was widowed young and remarried unofficially. Her second husband a carpenter with no title, but a very real warmth in his eyes. She hems more than skirts. She hems secrets. You start saving coins. Nothing grand, just a few shillings tucked into the lining of a handbag you never carry. You collect names, women who might shelter you, men who owe you nothing but respect, addresses of boarding houses near Brighton, reading rooms in Hampstead, streets where no one knows your face, and you begin to consider the question, what would it take for you to walk away from it all? Because here is the truth. Beneath all the layers of etiquette and law, beneath the corsets and parlour games and embroidered lies, there is always a moment when a woman sees the door. Not a metaphor, a real door, a literal threshold. Some walk through it. Most don't. Because of the shame, the ruin, the uncertainty, the letters that will never arrive again, the titles stripped, the bank accounts blocked, the friends who will say we simply can't be seen with her. Because of the children, if there are children, because of the fear. But what if you are past fear? One evening, at another of Beatrice's gatherings, the topic turns to the woman who left. Not Eliza Fairfax this time, but another. Someone one of the ladies knew at school. She vanished after a court hearing. Word has it she's now a painter in Marseille. She always said, one woman recalls, that she'd rather be penniless and herself than priceless and invisible. No one speaks for a moment. The silence feels like respect. And then a quiet voice, Ada again, says, I wonder if men ever lie awake wondering what it might cost to be free. You return home that night without remembering the carriage ride. The streets blur. Your thoughts are louder than the horses. In the foyer, your husband greets you with a glance. You're late. I know. He stares. Something flickers behind his eyes. Not suspicion exactly, but calculation. As if he's just now realizing you have your own tides. You've changed, he says, setting down his whiskey. You smile. Yes. He doesn't ask how or why. He walks away. In your room, you sit at your desk and draft a letter. You do not sign it. You do not date it. It begins. To whom it may concern, this is not a disappearance. It is a return. You place it in an envelope and slide it into the bottom drawer of your vanity, beneath old gloves and dried lavender. And you wait. Not for permission, but for the moment. Because you now understand something essential. Victorian marriage is a contract, but freedom is a declaration. The notebook is almost full now. The pages, once tentative and careful, have become crowded, scribbled margins, crossed out thoughts, words so furious they nearly tear the paper, but they are yours. Every sentence, every ink blot, every moment you refuse to disappear quietly. And yet, you cannot share it. Not publicly, not with your husband, not even with Beatrice. It is too honest, too dangerous. So you begin writing other letters, ones you never intend to send. The first is to your mother. You begin with, You never told me how hard it would be to be loved conditionally. You describe how you've had to learn what it means to be a woman by watching others settle, shrink, smile. How the sound of your own laughter sometimes startles you, because it arrives so rarely now. How marriage, for all its rules, offers almost no answers to the questions that matter. You don't write in anger. You write in grief. You seal the letter, then tuck it between the pages of a book you know she'll never borrow. The second is to your younger self. You write. They will dress it up in lace and vows, but it is still a cage if you're not allowed to name your own life. You try to remember what she dreamed of. A little cottage, a dog, a man who asked questions and waited for the answers. You wonder if she'd recognize you now, or pity you, or maybe, just maybe, be proud of how you've endured. The third letter is the hardest. It's to him, your husband. You begin, then stop, start again. This one isn't angry either. It's clinical, cool, a record, a map of all the rooms you've lived in together without really meeting. You do not accuse, you do not plead, you simply state, you write. You have a habit of offering kindness with a cost. You do not ask me to speak, but you resent my silence. You say you want peace, but what you mean is obedience. You pause, then add, I think, somewhere inside you, you believe you have been a good man, and perhaps you have, but being not cruel is not the same as being kind. You fold this letter more tightly than the others. It goes into the notebook. By now, the pages are layered with things no one will ever read. Letters to your sister, to the woman he loved, to God, to the child you never had, to the woman you might still become. Each entry carves out a little more space inside you. A woman you met at Beatrice's circle once said, "The problem isn't that we can't speak. It's that the world is built to pretend it can't hear us." You think about that often. You think about how many women have cupboards full of unsent letters, diaries hidden in floorboards, whole selves stacked behind baking tins and needlepoint, words like dust, gathering in silence. And tonight, you add one more. You dip the nib, scratch it across the paper. If no one listens, I will still speak. You blow the ink dry, and somewhere in the dark house the grandfather clock strikes 11. You begin to understand the power of what can never be mailed. Each letter you write is a truth set free, even if it lives its life folded in silence. And yet, the act of writing, of shaping your grief and fury into something legible, becomes your resistance. One afternoon, you place your notebook inside a box lined with old silk gloves and scrap fabric, then tuck the box inside your wardrobe. It doesn't feel like hiding. It feels like preserving, like sealing up a version of yourself no one else has ever met. But one day someone might need to. Perhaps a niece, or a stranger, or even a future you. That thought gives you comfort. There's a letter that haunts you more than the rest. Not because of what it says, but because of what it could. A letter you begin over and over again. A letter to the woman he's seeing. You've never written her name, even in your notebook. It's as if naming her gives her power, or worse, gives her a story. But tonight you try. You begin with, I do not hate you. You surprise even yourself. You thought you might. But the longer you write, the more clearly you see. She is not the architect of this structure. She is simply in it, like you. Another woman told something lovely, promised something steady, given half a truth and expected to feel whole. You write, you do not owe me an apology, but I hope you know he keeps a drawer for his secrets and it is very, very full. Then, unexpectedly, your hand trembles, because some part of you wonders, has she also written a letter she cannot send? You close the notebook, not from exhaustion, but because the truth is starting to feel heavier than the silence. The next morning your husband mentions a weekend hunting trip in Sussex. He doesn't ask if you'd like to come. He assumes, as always, that you will be fine here, alone in a house full of chandeliers and ticking clocks and air that listens but never answers. But this time you do not nod. You do not smile. You say, perhaps I'll go away too. He turns, confused. Where? You sip your tea. I'm not sure yet. Somewhere I've never been. Doesn't that sound lovely? He studies your face, searching for mischief or threat or meaning, but you offer him none. You've spent years performing clarity for others. Now, you're keeping it for yourself. Later, you walk to the postbox. Not to send a letter, just to feel the weight of all the ones you haven't. You press your gloved fingers to the cold metal and whisper, "Not yet." Because there's something sacred in knowing you could send them, that the words exist, that your story is not erased just because it's unsent. Back home, you add a fresh sheet to your notebook. At the top, in neat black ink, you write, Volume 2, because you are not done, because the truth is not finished, and because silence, once broken, can never quite be stitched back up again. It begins, as most forbidden things do, with something small, a hand resting a moment too long on your glove as it's handed back. A book returned with the corners folded, not from neglect, but from affection. A conversation that veers, ever so slightly, into the realm of real feeling. He's not a stranger. He's been at 3 of Beatrice's gatherings. You'd noticed his quiet listening, the way he asked questions without agenda. Not the sort of man who boasts, just one who sees. At first, it's just talk. You meet in a bookshop, then again at a gallery. You discuss art, but not the usual, not which paintings are tasteful enough for drawing rooms. You talk about light, faces, absence. He asks what you think, then waits for your answer. You're startled by how rarely that happens. One day he says, "Your husband must admire your mind." You laugh before you can stop yourself. I'm not sure he's ever met it. The words hang in the air like smoke. Neither of you pretends not to notice, and so begins the dance. Not the passionate kind spun in novels, all torn lace and stormy declarations. No, this is quieter, more dangerous for its subtlety. You begin to notice him noticing you, not your dress, not your position, you. He remembers things, your favourite passage from Shelley, that you hate the scent of cinnamon, the way your voice drops when you're tired. He once brings you a pressed violet tucked in a book, without explanation. You stare at it for 3 full minutes after he leaves, and you remember what it feels like to be read. In your own home, your husband becomes a background noise, still polite, still bland. He comments on your new hairstyle without realising it's the same as before. He doesn't see the letters tucked in your desk drawer, words written in your own hand, now suddenly matched by someone else's. You've written about touch before, the rules of it, the silence around it, but now you're living it. You stand a little closer to him at gatherings. Your fingers brush his sleeve when you pass the tea. One day, when no one is looking, he adjusts your cloak, and for a moment, his knuckles graze the back of your neck. You shiver. You write that night with ink so dark it bleeds through the page. To be seen is one thing. To be touched with reverence, like a cathedral, not a prize, is something else entirely. But here's the cruel thing about Victorian life. Even affection can be criminal. There are no letters, no evidence. And still, if anyone suspected, even without a kiss, even without a promise, you would be the one condemned. Not him. Never him. You know what's said about women like you? That you're unsatisfied, overeducated, reckless. You've heard the stories, the whispered ones, like Mrs. Langley, who was spotted walking with a widower at dusk and never invited to a garden party again, or Miss Havisham, who opened her boarding house to a single gentleman and woke to find her linen slashed and her windows bricked shut. No accusations, no proof, just consequence. But you're tired of the living like consequence is your only compass, so you begin to ask a different question. Not what might I lose, but what might I finally feel? The first time he touches your hand, really touches it, it's in the most ordinary place imaginable. You're leaving a gathering, the kind with too much tea and not enough truth, where conversation curled tightly around things that don't matter. The weather, the wallpaper, who's been seen where with whom. You both slip out early, pretending it's fatigue. Outside, the air is crisp and damp, a fog rolling in like it's been summoned. He offers his arm. You hesitate, then take it. Halfway down the block, as a carriage rattles past, his fingers slip over yours, palm against palm, firm, warm, still. He doesn't look at you, doesn't speak, and neither do you, because in that moment, everything is said. You return home to a house that feels colder than usual. The chandelier flickers. The hall smells like polish and boiled meat. You realise how long it's been since anyone in this space touched you without expectation. You write, "A single touch in the street holds more honesty than 100 nights in the same bed." In the days that follow, something changes in you. Not reckless abandon, not swooning romance, but a certain stillness, as though a storm that had long been rumbling inside you has finally found direction. Not escape, movement. You don't plan meetings, they happen. You bump into him at the gallery. He's reading a pamphlet on portraiture. He holds it out to you and says, "You'd appreciate this. It's about how shadows define the subject." You take it. You know what he means. Another time, at the lending library, he hands you a book wrapped in brown paper. No title on the outside. Inside, poetry. Real poetry. The kind that burns slow and doesn't ask permission. There's a passage marked, "Love, when it finds me, will not knock. It will press its hand against mine and wait." You cry reading it. Not loudly. Just enough to remember you still can. And through it all, your husband remains unaware or unwilling to look too closely. He notices the soft curl in your voice now and then. He asks, "Are you feeling better?" As if he's observing a seasonal shift. You nod. You're feeling more. You tell no one, not even Beatrice. Some truths are too delicate for speaking. They would crumble under explanation, because what you have is not an affair. Not in the way society imagines. There are no tangled sheets or creaking floorboards. What you have is recognition. You begin to understand how many women throughout history lived and died without ever being seen, without ever having someone lean forward, not to possess them, but to witness them. And now, someone has. You wonder sometimes what might happen if you let it become more. You imagine it. A room. A kiss. The moment his hand slides from yours to your cheek. The space between you closing like a held breath. But you don't act on it. Not because you're afraid of scandal, but because what you have is yours. Entirely. Secretly. Sacred. It lives in glances, in pages of poetry, in your hands brushing against each other like ships passing in the fog, whispering, "I know you, I know you're there." And for now, that is enough. More than enough. It's a Thursday when you meet her. The woman who makes the world tilt just slightly, as if some silent balance has shifted in a way no one else notices. But you feel it immediately. She's seated across from you at a luncheon hosted by one of Beatrice's more daring friends. The kind of gathering where the sugar cubes are spiked with rum and the piano plays Chopin just slightly too fast. She wears a navy jacket cut like a man's and a hat tilted like she knows exactly what effect it has. Her gloves are off. Her hands are elegant. Her voice, when she speaks, lands like silk across a polished floor. You don't catch her name at first, because she doesn't offer it. Instead, she says, "You look like someone who doesn't belong here either." You blink, smile, then say, "I suppose I'm still deciding." She laughs softly. "That's a good place to be." Later, Beatrice leans in and whispers, "Her name's Clara. She's complicated." But by then you already know that. You've never seen someone fold a napkin with such defiance. Throughout the afternoon, Clara speaks about things no woman is supposed to say in public. About books banned by the lending libraries. About a female sculptor whose work was deemed too muscular for a lady. About trousers. Trousers, not for men, but for women who refuse to accept that movement must come with modesty and restriction. You realise, with a jolt, that you're staring, and she knows it. She catches your gaze across the rim of her teacup, doesn't look away. That night, you write, "She looked at me like I was a story she'd already read, but wanted to hear aloud anyway." Clara becomes a name that lingers, a scent in your memory, a sentence half finished in your journal, and then, like all dangerous things, she returns, not at a party, but on the street. You're stepping out of the apothecary, restocking the household lavender water, an errand so dreadfully ordinary you feel yourself shrinking into it, when she appears beside you. "I thought it was you," she says, and she says it like it's the most natural thing in the world, as if she'd been waiting for this moment all week. She offers to walk with you. You hesitate, just long enough to remember you're a married woman in broad daylight in Mayfair. Then you say, "I'd like that." You walk for 20 minutes, maybe 30. You talk about unimportant things, shops, gardens, books, but the space between your shoulders softens in a way it hasn't in months. She asks how you've been, and when you answer, she listens, in a way that feels both new and ancient. At the corner of St. James and Maddox, she says, "There's a cafe I go to when I don't want to be anyone's anything. Would you come with me sometime?" You don't say yes. You say, "I think I already have." And for the first time in a long, long while, you don't feel like a wife. You feel like a woman with a secret, a beginning. The cafe is tucked away on a quiet street that doesn't boast about itself. No gold lettering, no frills, just a chipped blue door and windows fogged slightly from the warmth inside. The kind of place no respectable wife should be seen lingering in alone, but you're not there alone. Clara arrives already seated somehow. She's ordered tea, not the dainty floral kind served in parlours, but strong black Assam poured into heavy ceramic mugs. She doesn't stand when you arrive. She doesn't offer to help with your cloak. She simply says, "You came," as if it were inevitable. You sit. The table between you is small. The world beyond the window smaller still. At first you talk around the truth. You speak of books and gardens again. But gradually the veil thins. She asks, "What did you believe marriage would feel like?" You try to answer. You try to summon the words, but they don't come. So she rescues you. "I used to think it would feel like being chosen." You nod, and the nod cracks something open in your chest. She tells you her story, pieces of it anyway, enough to understand. She once tried marriage, once tried doing things the right way, and then stopped pretending. "I was too much," she says, stirring her tea. "Or maybe they were never enough." She doesn't say the word, but it's there. She's different. You've heard the phrases whispered before: inverts, deviants, Uranian women, terms wrapped in Latin to make them sound like diseases. Even the papers sometimes mention female friendships of an unnatural intensity, always with a wink that pretends to be scandal, but masks deeper fear. You should be frightened, you should leave, but you don't. Instead, you lean forward and ask, "Do you ever miss pretending?" She meets your eyes. "No, I miss being safe, but I've never missed being invisible." You understand, with a clarity that strikes like lightning, that Clara is not trying to seduce you. She's trying to invite you into a version of yourself you've always suspected was possible, but never dared open the door to. Back home, you find yourself studying the way other women touch one another. The brush of a hand on a shoulder, a glance held too long, a laugh that dips into something deeper. You notice how much tenderness passes between women when men aren't looking. You notice how often men don't look. Clara writes you a letter, not flowery, not poetic, just, "I hope you know that being seen isn't the same as being desired, and that desire in the right hands can feel like recognition." You fold the note into your notebook, not between your letters to your husband or your mother, but in its own space, a new chapter. You don't tell anyone about the cafe, or the walks, or the way Clara sometimes touches your wrist with the kind of gentleness you thought was extinct. You don't kiss her. You don't need to. You're kissed in the way she listens, in the way you speak, in the way the world feels possible again when she's near. In your notebook that night you write, "If marriage is the cage, she is the window. And for now, that's enough." You're sitting in the parlour one rainy afternoon pretending to read when the solicitor arrives. He isn't here for you, of course. He's come to speak with your husband. But he nods politely, offers his card, and is ushered into the study with the usual hush and clink of brandy decanters. You remain in your chair, your book open to the same page it's been on for 20 minutes, your tea cooling by the fire. but something about his visit itches at you. Later that evening, when the rain has faded and your husband is off at his club, you walk quietly into the study. The air still smells faintly of smoke and cologne, and there, on the corner of the desk, is a folded pamphlet left behind like a breadcrumb. The Marriage Act, Amendment, Implications for Property, Custody and Civil Separation. You freeze, then read. It's dry, dense, legalistic. But under the formality, there it is. The government's slow, grinding attempt to refine the rules of marriage. What counts as cruelty, when property might remain in a woman's name, how custody disputes could be settled without dragging a family name through scandal. You've heard whispers of these changes before, but seeing them printed, official, real, it feels like discovering that a crack in the wall has widened. Not yet a door, but no longer a hairline fracture. You take the pamphlet and read it in bed, under a dim lamp, your breath shallow as the clauses unfold. If passed, the amendment would allow a woman to retain control of her inherited property in marriage, to petition for civil separation without proving adultery and violence in combination, to keep custody of children under the age of 7 in certain cases. It's not liberation, but it is leverage. You write in your notebook, "The law doesn't love me, but it might finally start acknowledging that I exist." In the following days, you begin studying in secret. You request books through an alias at the lending library. Legal commentary, case records, even essays from dissenting barristers. It's tedious. It's exhilarating. You underline words like restitution, coverture, jurisprudence as if they were spells. You learn that under current law, the moment you married, you ceased to be a legal individual. You became an appendage, not metaphorically, factually. Femme couvert, a woman covered by her husband's identity, as if your selfhood were a candle snuffed out and replaced with his light. You think of Caroline Norton again, her fight, her rage. You think of how many women never even knew the shape of the trap they were in, and you begin drafting something bold, a document, not a letter, not a diary entry, a petition. You don't plan to send it, not yet, but you write it as if you might. To the Parliament of Her Majesty's Government. I submit that the institution of marriage, as currently defined, fails to protect the dignity, safety and autonomy of the women it claims to honour. You cite cases, you add footnotes, you write as though the walls are listening, and for the first time you want them to. And while your husband discusses tariffs and fox hunting over brandy, you're plotting a quiet insurrection with ink and parliamentary footnotes. Because even if you never leave, even if you never shout, you're learning the rules now, not to obey them but to outgrow them. One morning, you walk into the breakfast room and see your husband reading the paper. Nothing unusual. But this time, he pauses. He tilts the page. Frowns. Then he says, "Some nonsense about women's rights again. Apparently they want separate incomes now. What would they even do with it?" You lift your teacup and sip slowly, the warmth grounding you. What would they do with it? Everything. You say nothing, but inside you finish his sentence with a fury he'll never hear. They would live. You watch him fold the paper and return to his eggs. He doesn't know what's in your desk drawer. He doesn't know you've memorised the date Parliament will hear the next reading of the amendment. He doesn't know that you've copied excerpts of speeches by women bold enough to stand before men in powdered wigs and demand personhood. He certainly doesn't know that you've begun writing letters to women's groups under a false name. Letters of support, not as a crusader, but as a witness. "I cannot march," you wrote, "but I see you. I carry your fight in the space between my ribs." And then, something new. An invitation. One of your letters is answered. A Mrs. Abigail Penrose of Manchester writes back in careful, slanted handwriting. She says she received your words with a feeling of kinship I hadn't known I was still allowed to feel. She invites you to a quiet gathering of correspondents, women who write, advocate, teach, and yes, even agitate. You don't say yes, you don't say no, but the letter goes under your pillow, and you find yourself sleeping more soundly with it there. Then, a week later, something shifts. You receive an envelope, hand-delivered, not by post. Inside, a copy of the current Gazette. Your name isn't printed, of course, but there, in a small column, is an anonymous editorial that sounds achingly familiar. It mirrors your phrasing, your argument, the cadence of your very sentences. Someone published part of your draft. At first, your heart races. Fear floods your lungs. But then, nothing happens. No knock at the door, no scandal, no shame, just silence, followed by a ripple. At Beatrice's next gathering, a woman you've never spoken to before sidles up beside you during tea and says quietly, "I think whoever wrote that article must be very, very tired of pretending." You don't reply, but she presses a small badge into your palm, a silver brooch, shaped like a quill, a symbol, a signal, a secret. You wear it the next day, not on your dress, but inside your sleeve, close to your skin. That afternoon, walking through town, you spot another woman with the same glint of silver tucked near her collarbone. She sees yours. You see hers. Neither of you says a word, but you smile, because now you know there are more of you. You're not one woman shouting at a locked door. You're 100 keys, quietly turning, and whether or not the law changes tomorrow, something else already has. You've learned that the language of freedom isn't always shouted in the streets. Sometimes it is whispered between the margins, folded into drawers, pinned behind lace, and still it moves mountains. You return home that evening, you sit at your desk, and you begin again. This time, not as a wife, but as a writer. There's a child in your arms, not your own. He belongs to your cousin, Agatha, who's just given birth to her second. You've travelled to visit, half out of duty, half to escape the rising tension of your own house. The infant is bundled in soft muslin, blinking up at you with the suspicion of someone new to the world. His hand curls instinctively around your finger, and the moment startles you. Not because of the baby, but because of what you feel. Not longing, not even love, but confusion. The women around you coo and chatter, praising Agatha for her success, for how quickly she recovered, how handsomely the child resembles his father. There's cake, a nurse in the corner. Everyone is smiling like this is the very point of womanhood itself. You hold the child for 10 minutes, and then you give him back. That night, in the guest room with a fire hissing softly in the grate, you lie awake with one question echoing through your mind. What if I had done it? What if you had followed the path laid out for you without question? Let your body become a map of expectation. Wedding, pregnancy, motherhood. What would your days look like now? Would your husband have changed? Would you? You recall stories whispered at teas, women who miscarried quietly and were told not to speak of it, as though grief were unsightly. Others who bore child after child with no say, growing thin and ghost-like under the weight of gratitude they were expected to feel, and those who bore none and were pitied or blamed or both. You remember how one woman said with a tired laugh, "Once the baby comes, your body stops being yours." But truthfully, I'm not sure it ever was. And that's the thing that keeps you up now. Not the fear of pain or sacrifice or even failure. It's the knowledge that motherhood in this world is not a choice. It's a duty dressed up in sentiment, and to refuse it is seen not as self-preservation, but as rebellion. Your husband has mentioned children, of course, casually, distantly. "We'll want a son one day," he said once, over roast beef. You remember nodding because that was what you were supposed to do. You remember wondering whether wanting something means less when it's already been decided for you. Back home, he brings it up again. "We're not getting younger," he says. "You're 28. You tell him gently, "Now may not be the right time." He frowns. It's not a matter of timing. It's what marriage is for. He says this the way one might declare this is what fireplaces are for, warmth, what tables are for, eating. As if your body is furniture in the architecture of his life. You say nothing. That night you open your notebook, you write, "There's a part of me I haven't met yet, and I won't trade her for a cradle I didn't ask for." You're not sure if you want to be a mother. You're not sure if you ever will, but you're sure of one thing now. You will not do it as someone else's idea of a woman. If it happens, it will be your decision, your season, and no one, not your husband, not your mother, not the society that calls barren women unfulfilled, will get to choose it for you. Weeks pass, and the house begins to echo with a different kind of silence. Not the cold, indifferent quiet of two people drifting apart, but the heavier hush of decisions not yet spoken aloud, of a choice hanging in the air like fog on the edge of a field. You feel it in the way your husband clears his throat more often during meals, or in the way his hand hesitates before touching the small of your back, like he's still trying to summon the version of you he once expected. He brings it up again on a Sunday morning. No warning, just a casual murmur over the newsprint. I've spoken to Dr. Harrow about a fertility consultation. He says the sooner the better. You blink. He doesn't look up. You say, "You spoke to a doctor about me." Now he glances your way, surprised. It's not about you, it's about us. But you know better. No, it's about legacy and control. He stiffens. It's natural to want children. You fold your napkin, not delicately. It's natural to want a say in it. You leave the room before he replies. You don't want to hear him explain how you're being difficult, how other women would be thrilled. You've already heard versions of that argument your entire life, from teachers, from neighbours, from older women who spoke in hushed tones about duty as if it were synonymous with love. You go to your writing desk, but today you don't write in your notebook. You reach for a different page, a fresh sheet. You begin composing a letter, not to anyone you know, but to the woman you imagine might be sitting in another grand house, in another city, holding the same fear in her chest. You write. They say that motherhood is womanhood fulfilled, but I have seen too many mothers lose themselves in the name of it. I have seen too many cradle-shaped cages. You don't send the letter. You fold it, slide it into an envelope, seal it shut and tuck it in the lining of your dressing gown. Because there may come a time when you need to remember why you chose what you did. Later that week, your husband brings home a child's bonnet, pale pink, handmade. He sets it on your vanity without a word, as if this might warm your womb into agreement, as if this might do what affection and partnership did not. You stare at it, then pick it up. The stitches are fine, neat. Someone, somewhere, made this with tenderness. You trace the seam with your thumb and whisper, "I will not become a mother through manipulation." That night, you take the bonnet, wrap it carefully and walk it down to the river. You let it drift. You watch it spin and glide, lighter than your breath. And in the dark, you don't feel empty. You feel intact. Because what you are building isn't a legacy made of bloodline. It's one made of choice. The house changes after the bonnet. He doesn't mention it. He never asks where it went. But the air between you shifts, cooler, stiffer, not hostile, not yet, but alert. Like something once asleep has stirred, and though it hasn't risen, it's watching you now. He stays out later than usual. Dinners grow shorter. Your conversations shrink to fragments. Discussions about the accounts, a mention of an upcoming dinner party, the occasional dry comment about weather or politics. Nothing personal, nothing real. But strangely, you feel no regret, only clarity. You begin dressing in darker colours, not out of mourning, but out of preference. The bright pastels of girlhood no longer suit you. You've outgrown them like old gloves. Tight, restrictive, meant for someone who never asks questions. Now you wear navy, forest green, shades of burgundy. You pin your hair more loosely. You begin to resemble someone even your husband doesn't quite recognise anymore. And that seems to bother him. One evening, as he enters the drawing room and finds you writing, he pauses. You never used to spend so much time with your nose in a notebook. You don't look up. I never used to know what to write. He says nothing, but you feel the weight of it in the floorboards as he walks away. That night, as the fire hisses low and the lamps cast soft golden light across your desk, you do something you haven't dared before. You write a will, not a legal one, Not enforceable under the laws that still consider you a financial shadow of your husband, but a true one. You title it plainly, "In the event of my death, whether by body or self," you write, "To my sister, I leave the blue scarf she gave me the year I first wept as a wife. To Beatrice, I leave the notebook hidden in the wardrobe wall. To the woman I might have become if I'd never married, I leave my name." You pause, then add, "And to no one, not even him, do I leave my silence." You tuck the letter in an envelope and press it flat beneath the false bottom of your drawer. It feels final, but not sad. You spend more time outside now. You walk to the edge of Hyde Park and sit on the same bench, watching nannies herd their charges, young couples drift arm in arm, and old women feed crumbs to pigeons like they're feeding versions of themselves. Sometimes Clara joins you. She never asks how things are. She simply offers presence, and sometimes that's all you need. A presence that doesn't demand anything, that doesn't shrink you down to a role. You talk about poetry, about legal reforms, about gloves and boots, and how winter always seems to arrive with a kind of sneer. And then one day, you ask her, "What do you think happens to women like us?" She tilts her head. "We change the rules." You smile. "And if we don't?" She shrugs. "Then we write new ones, for someone else to follow." You walk home alone that day, but your steps feel different, more yours. And when you pass your husband in the hall that evening, he says, "You've been out often lately." You nod. "Yes." "That's not usual." You pause. Then, smiling just slightly, you say, "Neither am I." The telegram comes on a Tuesday. A clean envelope, a smudge of ink, a single sentence. Your husband's mother has died. Immediate arrangements required. No emotion, no signature, just duty wrapped in telegram grey. You stare at it for a long moment, then fold it neatly and place it on the hall table where your husband will see it. You do not fetch him. You do not smooth his brow. You simply let the weight of it wait for him, as so many weights have waited for you. When he reads it, his face hardens, not with grief, but with calculation. His mother was never cruel, but never warm. Their affection was performed, not lived. Still, the death of a parent has a way of rearranging the furniture inside you. He says nothing for hours, and then you'll wear black. You nod. The funeral is quiet and cold, as expected. The chapel is filled with people who cared more about her status than her soul. There are roses, pale gloves, eulogies so rehearsed they sound like advertisements. You sit beside your husband and watch the way his jaw twitches when the vicar mentions devotion to family. He doesn't weep. He doesn't reach for your hand. Afterward in the carriage he says, "I suppose that's it then." You reply, "For her, yes." He glances at you but doesn't argue. What neither of you says is what you're both thinking. This is what it ends like. Respectable, lonely, and entirely unsurprising. That night, the house is heavy with silence. You walk through the drawing room alone, pausing beside the cabinet where she once kept her lace handkerchiefs and faded photographs. You open a drawer, and there, to your quiet astonishment, you find a notebook. Small, worn at the edges, wrapped in ribbon. You take it to your room and open it slowly, breath caught. Inside, lists, notes, fragments, pages filled with half-thoughts and abandoned sentences. A line near the front reads, "I was once meant to be an opera singer. I still hum when no one listens." You turn another page. "My husband never asked if I was happy. I never thought to say that I wasn't." You close the notebook, and for the first time you grieve, not for your mother-in-law as you knew her, but for the woman she never got to become. The girl who dreamed of the stage, the wife who learned not to speak her pain, the widow who hummed when she thought the house was empty. You weep, quietly, for her, for yourself, for the great echoing lineage of silenced women whose notebooks outlived their voices. And when the tears are done, you write a new page in your own. She never got out, but I will. The next day, you wear your morning dress like armour. You walk through the town with your spine straight and your notebook folded beneath your arm. You pass the florist, the bakery, the post, and then you pass a little girl, no older than 7, humming to herself while twirling in the street. You pause. She doesn't notice you, but you smile, because she does not know the rules yet, and maybe, just maybe, you'll help rewrite them before she learns. You return to the old house on a grey afternoon that smells like iron and dust. Not your house, the one you grew up in. You haven't seen it in years, not since before the wedding, before the vows, before everything. It sits just outside the city, nestled behind a crooked iron gate and an overgrown hedge your mother never could bear to trim. The visit is meant to be brief, just a courtesy. Your father has passed, and your sister, now married and managing an estate of her own, has summoned you to sort through a few remaining things. Come sooner rather than later, she writes. The new tenants want the keys by month's end. You step inside, and the air hits you like memory. The smell of wax polish, dried lavender, old paper, and beneath it all, the faintest trace of something you can't quite name. Hope, maybe, or what's left of it. You walk slowly through the front hall, fingertips grazing the banister. The wallpaper peels now. The wood creaks more than it used to, but it's still here. The place where you first learned silence, where you first practiced being polite, where you first looked in the mirror and asked yourself, is this all? Upstairs, in the bedroom that once held your childhood, the furniture is covered in white cloths. The vanity, the wardrobe, the bed frame that groaned when you shifted at night. All ghosts now. Your sister has already taken most of the belongings, left you only a small box marked in pencil. Your things. You sit cross-legged on the floor and open it. Inside, a cracked mirror compact, a faded hair ribbon, 3 postcards never sent, and, neatly wrapped in brown paper, a bundle of letters. Your letters. Ones you wrote and never sent. To no one in particular. Maybe to yourself. Maybe to the life you once imagined. You recognise your handwriting immediately. Softer then, more open. The ink in some is smeared, watermarked with old tears. In one you wrote, "If I grow up and forget how to feel, please remind me who I was when I believed that words could save me." You sit very still, and you realise you never forgot. Not entirely. But you did bury her, the girl who wrote these letters, the one who walked barefoot in the garden and said no just to see how it felt, the one who made up songs and whispered secrets to the wind and once shouted at the dinner table, "Why must everything be so quiet?" You owe her something. You read every letter, all 12. Each one cracks the walls you've spent years fortifying. By the time the light begins to fade, you are different. Not new, not healed, but reconnected. And for the first time in years, you pick up a pen, not your sleek fountain pen, but an old one from the box with blotchy ink and a bent nib. You write a new letter, addressed to her, to you. I thought I left you behind, but you waited. You always knew I'd come back. I didn't survive what I survived just to forget who I was before the corsets and contracts. I will not lose you again. You seal the letter and tuck it into your coat. The house groans gently behind you as you walk down the stairs, and just before you leave, you turn back and say aloud, to no one, "I remember now." You return to London with wind in your coat and dust in your sleeves. Something about your step is different now. Not faster, not louder, but more honest. You walk as if you're no longer borrowing your life from someone else. Clara notices it first. She meets you at the corner cafe, your unofficial hideout tucked beside a row of bookshops where the coffee is weak but the solitude is strong. "You've changed," she says, before you've even sat down. You raise an eyebrow. "I've remembered." "Ah," she smiles. "That's more dangerous than changing." You grin, and it's real. The kind that reaches the eyes. As the cups clink and the light filters in through the dusty window panes, you tell her about the letters, about the girl you were, about how your silence had never truly been empty. It had been waiting. Do you think it's too late to live differently, you ask? Clara doesn't answer right away. She lifts her teacup, eyes you carefully, then says, "Darling, we are Victorian women. Everything is too late, and we do it anyway." You laugh, loud enough that a gentleman 2 tables over glances your way, and for once, you don't lower your voice. Back home, your husband notices the shift too. You no longer ask before taking the carriage. You host your own guests. Women, mostly. Some unmarried, some scandalous, some both. You begin drafting essays, short, sharp things that question the sanctity of certain domestic traditions. You publish one under a pseudonym, Mrs. A. E. Finch, a name as fictitious as the freedom it's slowly building. He confronts you only once. "What are you doing?" You look up from your desk. "Living," he scoffs. "At my expense?" You smile, tired, patient. "At mine, finally." The conversation doesn't go further. He storms out, slams the door, and you, rather than tremble, finish your paragraph. That week, a widow you barely know sends you a letter in soft grey ink. Your words reminded me of myself. I had not heard my own voice in years. Thank you. You cry when you read it. Not from sorrow, from recognition. Because this is how change begins. Not in revolutions or declarations, but in whispers passed from woman to woman like candlelight in a dark hall. You begin attending lectures, reading case law, studying names of reformers, suffragists, dissenters. You memorize the date of the Married Women's Property Act. You speak it aloud like a prayer, 1870, 1882, 1893. Milestones carved in ink and sweat. And all the while, the house grows stranger, not worse, not unkind, just increasingly irrelevant. A symbol of a world you're no longer beholden to. One evening, as you walk the long corridor past the drawing room, you catch sight of yourself in the mirror. Not the polished wife, not the disappointed daughter, not the ghost. You see someone else now, someone becoming, and you whisper, without ceremony, "Welcome back." The envelope arrives with no return address, just your name written in an unfamiliar hand. Inside, an invitation, cream paper, embossed edge, no signature. But the message is clear. A gathering of women, no husbands, no titles, no apologies. You hesitate. It could be anything. A trap, a prank, a well-meaning cousin's idea of a joke. But something in your gut stirs. A flicker, a recognition. So you go. It's held in a townhouse in Bloomsbury. Modest, ivy-draped, book-scented. The sort of place that looks like it's been listening for 100 years. You knock once. The door opens. A young woman, freckled, sharp-eyed, greets you without fanfare. She offers no title, just your name. You're expected. She leads you upstairs to a parlour filled with warm lamps and worn armchairs. There are a dozen women already there, some older, in stiff collars and sombre gowns, some young, hair loose, laughter easy. All of them look awake, like they've stepped off the stage of a dream and into their own scene. No one asks your last name. No one asks whose wife you are. Instead, they ask, "What are you working on?" Not what do you do, not where do you come from, but what are you making with your life? You say, essays, on women, on choice. One nods, another smiles. A third leans forward and says, "Good, we need more of those." The meeting begins without ritual, no gavel, no hymn, just shared tea and sharp voices. They discuss laws, old and new, birth control pamphlets being printed in secret, a woman who lost her child in court because her husband claimed her temperament was improper, a working-class mother arrested for selling pamphlets on menstruation. Your throat tightens. These are not distant tragedies. These are echoes of your own life, pressed into different shapes. You speak, at first timidly, then with more certainty. You tell them about the notebook, the letters, the legacy of silence handed down like heirloom jewellery. They listen, and when you finish, an older woman, hair braided like a crown, reaches across the armchair gap and lays a hand on yours. "You've come through the fire," she says. You laugh gently. "Not unburned." She squeezes your fingers, but with the match still in your hand. That night you walk home in the dark, notebook tucked close. The gas lamps flicker. A horse cart rattles by. Somewhere a man is shouting about a lost scarf. Life moves on, but you feel suspended, like someone has lifted the sky just enough to let you breathe. You lie awake in bed for hours staring at the ceiling. Your husband stirs beside you, doesn't wake. You turn to the wall and whisper, "There are more of us." And in the quiet, the shadows don't feel as lonely. They feel populated. The second meeting feels less like an event and more like a homecoming. You arrive earlier this time, offering to help set chairs, pour tea, straighten the stacks of leaflets on the windowsill. A young woman with inky fingers thanks you shyly. She's been printing copies of The Married Woman's Guide to Legal Personhood. The title alone makes you smile. Conversations bloom like vines. One woman is organising aid for factory girls locked into 16-hour shifts. Another's writing a column under the name Mrs. Nobody. A third, quiet, middle-aged, formerly meek, has begun teaching wives how to open their own accounts at discreet banks. None of it is illegal, but all of it is unexpected. That's the power. That's the danger. And you bring your pages, the ones you've written late into the night, in lamplight that flickers when the wind presses hard against the windows. You read them aloud, hesitant at first, your voice rusted from disuse. But the room holds you like breath. You write about what it feels like to sit in a marriage and feel unseen, to host dinner parties and wonder if anyone there has read a book written by a woman, to wear black not for mourning, but for camouflage, to survive not because you were brave, but because you were careful. When you finish, the room is silent. Then a woman in the corner, hair streaked with white, says softly, "That's exactly what I never had the words for." And you realise, this isn't just therapy, it's blueprint. Later, as you help wash teacups in the narrow kitchen, the hostess leans in close. "You know," she murmurs, "these walls aren't as soundproof as we'd like. The neighbour says her husband has been sniffing around." You pause. "What does that mean?" She shrugs, calm. "Just means we need to move." And just like that, this quiet revolution packs itself into crates, into satchels, into notebooks. You're handed a slip of paper before you leave. New location, Wednesday next, same time, different window. There's no panic, only adaptation. This is what women have always done, reshaped themselves like water around stone. When denied one path, they build another through the hedgerow, and when even that is barred, they teach their daughters how to carry fire in the folds of their skirts. That night, you write again. Only this time, the words are not just memory. They are maps. You outline essays, speeches. You sketch out the idea of a series, voices from the parlour, stories of real women, told through fictional disguises slipping past the censors like poetry. And in the final pages, you write to your mother-in-law again, not with sorrow, but with invitation. "There are chairs here you never got to sit in, but I will keep one warm, just in case your ghost ever finds its way to the door." You fold the page, slide it behind her old mirror in the drawing room, then you blow out the lamp, and dream not of freedom, but of continuity, of women linking arms across time, whispering truths through wallpaper and linen and tea steam. You've always known how to make a home look beautiful. But now you begin to wonder, what if a home could also feel true? It starts with small things. The curtains in the sitting room, those stiff brocade monstrosities chosen by your husband's mother, come down. You replace them with soft muslin, letting the light come in bare and unapologetic. The parlour rug is swapped for one you find at a women's charity sale. It smells of cardamom and has a stain in one corner, but it sings in colour. And the books. You bring in books by the armful, some penned by women under names like Cora Bell or George Eliot, others more daring, passed hand to hand among the lecture women. Titles your husband would frown at, titles your father would scoff at. But they line your shelves now, spines turned proudly outward. Your husband notices, of course. He walks in one evening and pauses in the doorway, eye-catching on a volume titled The Subjection of Women. "Is that what we're reading now?" he asks, tone brittle. You close the book gently. "Yes." He says nothing more, but the air between you turns thin. The next morning he eats breakfast in silence. No paper, no comment on the marmalade, just the sound of knife on toast, too sharp for the hour. But you don't retreat, because you've learned something from the women with the inky fingers and shifting addresses. Resistance isn't always loud. Sometimes it's decorative. Sometimes it's the book on the side table, the curtain that moves in the wind, the pamphlet tucked inside a recipe book, the way you no longer rise when he enters the room, not out of rebellion, but because you were already seated with purpose. It's not war. But it's not submission either. It's something new. And in this new space you begin to write with teeth. Your essays grow bolder. You take on the marriage laws directly now. You describe the way women are locked into contracts they cannot escape, the way children default to the father in a court, the way honour is always about obedience and never about dignity. You know what you're risking. You've seen what happens to women labelled difficult, hysterical, unwomanly. But the pen in your hand doesn't shake anymore, because you've remembered that you're not writing just for you. You're writing for the girl in the attic who scribbles between chores, for the woman in the country who reads by candlelight while her husband snores, for the widow who is finally free but doesn't know what to do with her name. And slowly, like ivy up brick, your words begin to spread. You hear your phrases echoed in other rooms, in other mouths. You see a sentence of yours scrawled on a pamphlet you didn't write. And then one day, a girl no older than 20 approaches you at the grocer's, eyes wide. "Are you Mrs. A.E. Finch?" You pause, smile, and say, "Yes, but only because it's safer that way," she beams. "Thank you." You watch her walk away, hair ribboned, spine tall, and you realise this is what it feels like when the page becomes a doorway. The walls of your house have not crumbled, but they've shifted, imperceptibly, like the settling of old stone when no one's looking. And in the stillness between your husband's questions and your silence, a truth has taken root. He is not cruel, but he is unbending, which in this era is almost the same thing. You realise it fully one evening, as you read quietly by the hearth, and he clears his throat in that deliberate way that announces a decision disguised as a discussion. "I've accepted an invitation," he says. You look up, eyes steady. "To speak at the Merchant Society, about order, about the importance of stability within the family." Your breath stills. "Do you mean obedience?" you ask. His lips twitch, not quite a smile. "I mean respect, which your recent behaviour seems to have forgotten." He's careful with his words. No outright accusations, nothing that would stain a dinner conversation. But in his tone is the same chill you used to hear in your father's voice. That quiet threat. Be pleasant or be punished. You close your book. "You're welcome to speak," you say. "But so am I." That gets his attention. You tell him you've been invited to contribute to a reading at a women's hall. You don't ask for permission. You state it like the weather. He laughs, short and cold. "Do they know who your husband is?" You smile just slightly. "They know who I am." He stares for a moment, weighing whether to press harder. But you've changed the rules without asking, and he doesn't know which game you're playing anymore. He leaves the room, and you breathe. The night of the reading, your hands are calm. You wear your simplest gown, your oldest shawl, your mother-in-law's brooch turned backward so it shines only for you. The hall is small, full of mismatched chairs and determined eyes. You speak of domestic storms and invisible cages. You read lines from your essays, your letters, even that forgotten journal from your girlhood, the one with ink smudges and bitten edges. You speak plainly, softly, and still. The room is silent when you finish. The good kind of silence. The kind that holds. Afterward, a woman presses your hand and whispers, "You said what I was too afraid to name." You walk home alone under the gas lamps, notebook clutched to your chest. The mist curls around your boots, and you don't hurry. You've begun to love these walks. the sound of your own steps, the way your breath makes ghosts in the air. At home, he's already asleep, or pretending to be. You undress slowly, fold your clothes neatly, place your shawl over the chair. Then you climb into bed beside him and face the wall. Your thoughts swirl, not angry, not scared, just awake. And somewhere deep inside you realize something startling. You're not waiting anymore. Not for him to change. Not for the law to notice. Not for the century to catch up. You're already becoming the person your letters always hoped you'd be. You wake to a letter slid under your door. The paper is thick. The ink smudged. It's unsigned. Again, but familiar. A note. Brief. The magistrate has begun sniffing around the Bloomsbury meetings. Change is necessary. A quieter location has been secured. We meet in the conservatory behind the print shop, through the alley, past the red shutters. And then, beneath it, a quote in looping script. The strongest chains are the ones women forget they're wearing. You sit for a long while at your desk, the letter in your lap, morning light dripping through the muslin curtains like syrup. Your house is quiet. Your husband is gone for the day. Outside, a carriage rolls past, iron wheels clattering over cobbles as if nothing has changed. But everything has. Your writing desk is cluttered now with drafts, some hopeful, others furious. Headlines in your mind. Why the nursery is not a prison. On choosing solitude over silence. The ghosts of obedience, a woman's inheritance, each one seeded from your life, your house, your own once quiet mouth. You dress in your most ordinary clothes, the ones no one remembers, and make your way to the alley behind the print shop. The conservatory is hidden by overgrown ivy, its glass dusty with the fingerprints of old tenants. Inside, women, dozens, some from the Bloomsbury days, others new, a chorus of life. They speak in hushed tones, laugh too loudly, cry without shame. There's a baby sleeping in a basket beside the chair of a woman who once sued for custody and won, an anomaly so rare it became legend. There are cakes and clumsy sketches of proposed banners. There's a girl of just 16 reading Wollstonecraft aloud as though it's a hymn. You exhale and join them. No one asks where you've been. No one needs to. Because you carry it in your posture now, the way your shoulders no longer curl inward, the way you listen without flinching. Someone hands you a bundle of pamphlets. Distribute discreetly, they whisper. You tuck them inside your coat beneath the lining you once stitched for handkerchiefs and lavender sachets. Now it holds truth. That night you return home and write furiously. A piece titled, The Beautiful Cage, a personal account of Victorian marriage. It is not kind, it is not cruel, it is honest. You describe the performance of perfection, the way women become furniture, silent, polished, arranged for display. You speak of the suffocating praise, the weaponized compliments, the worship of a wife's obedience. You write of how loneliness can grow even when your days are full of guests and gowns and gentle dances. And you don't write anonymously. For the first time you sign your name. Not Mrs. A. Finch, not a concerned lady. You, your real, breathing, unbecoming name. The next morning you mail it to a radical journal run out of Manchester. You know the risks. You know the backlash will come in sideways glances, narrowed eyes at dinner, whispers in drawing rooms, perhaps worse. But you've already faced silence. Now you choose sound. And in your choice, something unshackles. The article spreads faster than you'd dared to dream, and slower than you'd hoped. It appears first in the back pages of the Northern Women's Quarterly, nestled between a piece on wage theft in the textile mills and a poem about brass hairpins. But the words find their readers. They always do. A governess in Sussex writes a letter to the editor, quoting your line about the performance of wifeliness as a profession, not a partnership. A midwife in Liverpool passes a copy to every mother she visits. A young widow in Bath sends you a pressed violet and a thank you, though she signs only with her initials. And then comes the letter you never expected. From your sister. Your estranged, obedient, candle soft sister. She writes plainly, "I read your piece. I cried. Not because I was angry, but because I recognise myself in every sentence." You fold that letter so many times it frays at the edges. You think back to your mother-in-law's mirror, where you once hid your hopes. You look into it now and see someone who doesn't flinch. Your husband does not mention the article, but one evening you catch him standing in the doorway of your study, eyes scanning your shelves, your pages, your life now so obviously lived in the open. "You're different," he says at last. You set down your pen. "No, just visible." He nods once and walks away. That night you sleep with the windows open, letting in a wind that smells of coal smoke and lilac. You dream of an older woman in a grey shawl standing at a printing press. Her hands are stained, her face is stern, but her eyes are proud. You wake with a start and realise she was you, years from now, still fighting, still writing, still passing the match down to the next. And even though you know the laws have not yet shifted, the courts remain stacked against women, and the world still rewards silence. Something is cracking, not loudly, not visibly, but deep in the structure of things. You hear it in the rustle of your essays being read aloud in hidden parlours. You feel it in the girl who dares to say no without flinching. You taste it in the words that once trembled and now strike like bells. And so, you write one last page for the book that was never meant to be published. If one woman can see herself clearer because I spoke, then the silence was never golden. It was merely convenient. You close the book, tuck it on the shelf beside the others, and walk to the window just as the sun begins to rise, no longer caged, no longer waiting, just awake. You made it, friend. Now take a deep breath. Let the final images settle like dust in a quiet room, the muslin curtains lifting with the breeze, the clatter of carriage wheels fading into distance, the rustle of paper beneath a determined hand. You've walked through drawing rooms and courtrooms, parlour secrets and pamphlet revolutions. You've heard women whisper behind doors and shout beneath gas lamps, each one pulling back the velvet drapes of Victorian marriage to let in the sun. And you? You were right there with them. You felt the weight of the corset not just on the body, but on the soul. You tasted the bitterness of obedience served with tea. You saw the revolution not in fire and banners, but in letters, stares, choices, pauses. Tonight, maybe your own silence feels a little different. Maybe you carry something now. A question, a spark, a shadow of someone who might have written too had she been allowed. Let that be your souvenir from this story. And if your eyes are still open, just barely, let them close now. Imagine soft paper, warm hands, a crackling fire, and words passed hand to hand like stolen bread. Nourishment in secret. You're safe now. The world is quiet. And somewhere, in a room lit by a single lamp, another woman begins to write.